What is up, y'all? Welcome back to Rough Drafts. My name is Sam Pratt, and I am very excited to talk about Lorwyn Eclipsed. So I'm going to start with a little bit of big picture stuff. This format is shaping out to be pretty grindy. This is the opinion held by pretty much everyone I've talked to that has played games of this set. It's also matched my experience really well. I felt that card advantage, just being able to see more cards in your deck has really mattered. I'm just going to dive right in. A couple card advantage spells that I really have been impressed with are Unexpected Assistance, which is a common. It's the blue Convoke spell. It's 3 blue Convoke, instant, draw 3 cards, discard a card. Also common, I've been very impressed with Burning Curiosity, which is a 3-mana sorcery in red. You can blight 1 as an additional cost, and it exiles the top 2 cards of your library, 3 if you blight, and you can play those cards until the end of your next turn. This one's been really good in my mid-range red decks. These are just some cards that I've noticed other people are high on as well. At uncommon, you also have Unbury, which is an instant in black and uncommon that you can either raise dead, bring a creature back from your graveyard to your hand, or 2 creatures if they share a creature type. The Eclipse cycle has all been really, not like overperforming because we kind of knew these cards were going to be busted, but meeting our expectations or perhaps even exceeding them. The Eclipse cycle are all the hybrid uncommons that search your top 4 cards of your library for a basic or of a specific type or the creature type. And also like something like Gathering Stone, which I'll just read the text out. This is a 4-mana artifact at uncommon. As it enters, you choose a creature type. It reduces the cost of those creatures by 1. And when the artifact enters and at the beginning of your upkeep, you basically surveil 1. But if it's a creature of that type, you put it into your hand. This is a card I thought was going to be, pun intended, stone unplayable going into the format, even if you had a lot of cards of a certain type. Just because it's like a 4-mana thing that you need multiple turns to really get your cards worth out of it. But I've heard a lot of reports of people playing this and playing against it and saying that's been performing really well. People that I trust. So it really feels like this is a very grindy format, more similar to Aether Drift from last year than Avatar, for instance. And I have also felt like removal matters, but I want to frame this more in the other direction rather than just saying like removal is good, because removal is good in every limited format. But I feel like removal matters in a certain way in this format because I have felt that the games come down to both having access to enough cards. I do not feel like I have been dying with cards in my hand very often or killing my opponent with cards in their hand very often. I feel like I am running out of stuff to do. And I feel like the games are really coming down to 1 or 2 or a handful of very individually impactful creatures or cards. That could be rares, that could be uncommons, it can also be a couple commons. And that's what I want to talk about today, is the dynamic of cards that individually can warp the game by themselves. So there are a lot of good rares in this format. There were also a lot of good rares in Avatar. I think the density of bombs in each of these formats is about the same, but I think that Avatar had a much different format texture than Lorwyn Eclipse does. So Avatar had a ton of good rares, but Avatar was very much about just building a solid Magic the Gathering limited deck. Like, it was very mid-range. You wanted creatures in your deck, a really good curve. You wanted creatures that were able to effectively attack or block. It wasn't like core set Magic, because you did care about certain themes. Like, you wanted to make deck building concessions to like allies, lessons, the monocolor payoffs, but it was mostly mid-range Magic. And most of the rares in that format did not really like invalidate the game state or take over the game themselves. They were just simply really efficient 2-for-1s, 3-for-1s, etc. As a whole, there's some outliers, of course, but cards that I'm thinking of are cards like the Fire Nation Drill, which is the vehicle that comes down, it kills something, and then it's a 6/3 trampler. This is just like a very efficient, impactful 2-for-1. But it's not really a card that takes over the game by itself, that sort of makes the game all about itself. It's just simply really efficient. And I felt like that's what Avatar was all about. Was the rares were just efficient 2-for-1s like that. You could beat a Fire Nation drill pretty easily, not pretty easily, but like fairly easily if you were effectively pressuring your opponent when they played the drill so that it was awkward for them to crew it. You could beat a Fire Nation drill, but by just playing a bunch of 2-for-1s of your own and outcarding them, because it's really like just inefficient Chupacabra, like a Flame Tongue Kavu. I don't feel like this dynamic of everything is just kind of like two generic resource exchanges and tempo really matters. I haven't really felt like that is the dynamic that's going on in Lorwyn. I felt a lot more like the games come down to individually powerful cards making the games about themselves. I think part of it is that when you're building these creature like typal decks, like a Merfolk deck or a Kithkin deck, you really need to just hit a certain threshold of a certain creature type. And that results in you playing a lot of cards where some of the power in the card is tied up in its creature type. And you end up just playing a bunch of dudes, basically. Like you have a couple of really impactful cards and you're playing a bunch of dudes that just sort of support this strategy. And when your deck is built like that, you are more susceptible to just drawing a curve of creatures that can't necessarily like pressure your opponent particularly well. And you end up in more board stalls because resources are getting traded off more, or like one player just doesn't have good attacks, or both players just don't have good attacks and the game stalls out. That's the dynamic I've really felt. And it makes a more dramatic impact when a card is very individually powerful or has the potential to be individually powerful, and makes the game all about that card because it sort of dwarfs what all the other cards are doing in this format. Removal, like I said, has felt important in this respect because you want to be able to answer your opponent's really swingy, impactful cards on time. But I don't want to be like a broken record, or I don't want to be just very generic and say like, yeah, removal's good in this format, because I feel like this is more actionable to building decks that have a lot of individually impactful cards in this format, rather than trying to beat your opponent's individually impactful cards. I feel like there's an edge to be gained by thinking about what impact the cards in your deck actually have. So I'm going to take a step back from that and talk about an article that I was reminded of when I was thinking about what to talk about this week on this format, by Jean-Emmanuel Duprat. It's on haruya.com. And I will link this in the show notes. Of course, I highly recommend you read it. It's actually an article about sealed. It's a 2-parter article that has just various sealed advice that Jean-Emmanuel Duprat gives to people. It's mostly centered around Kaldheim sealed, which if you want to just look at some Kaldheim cards, I love Kaldheim. But the article is really great, but I want to focus on one of the concepts that he talks about called dynamic mid-range. So the concept of dynamic mid-range in this context comes up because he's talking about the two sides of Kaldheim Sealed being, well, if you have a bunch of bombs, you can play a 5-color green deck. That happens a lot. If you have a bunch of equipment and a good curve, you can play the red-white aggro deck, and that's very effective as well. If you're kind of in between, you're kind of in a tight spot, but he comes up with this name for this type of mid-range deck, and describes dynamic mid-range, which is basically very similar to, you could also call it like proactive mid-range. And in the article, which I recommend checking out, he talks about Hour of Devastation Limited, which was also a format with a lot of very impactful bombs. And you wanted to, and not very good aggressive decks, and you wanted to be able to play a mid-range deck that basically presented a lot of threats in sequence that your opponent had to care about. I'm just going to go ahead and read a couple quotes from the article. He says, what if instead of helping us survive, the role of these early plays, which he means like 2 drops, 3 drops, just the creatures that you're playing, became to pressure the opponent enough to make them use their cards suboptimally. So I'm really like this framing for this format because it's not really framing the format as, well, you want to play a bunch of removal so you can answer your opponent's impactful plays. It's I want to fill my deck with a bunch of impactful creatures up the curve to force my opponent into disrupting me and making their life really awkward while I'm pressuring them. And I think that really describes what is going on in this format. I'll read a little bit more from the article. The point wasn't to kill them fast unless their draw was particularly bad. It was to put them off balance, prevent them from using their cards the way you typically do when you expect the games to go long and be decided by bombs. So specifically, he has like an example with a card called Puncturing Blow, which is a 4-mana burn spell. Without this notion of dynamicism, you would never play Puncturing Blow on a random 3/4 blocker in the mid game, but rather keep it for a potential god or eternalized creature. These are like the bombs in this format. However, if using that removal makes them use their Puncturing Blow on your attacker because they would be too close to dead otherwise, you might have made a very favorable trade. Your removal spell might not have dealt with whatever ridiculous bomb they have, but theirs might have exiled your future Scorpion God. So what he's talking about is playing these impactful proactive threats up the curve and forcing your opponent into a situation where they need to maybe consider using their impactful removal spells on your threats before you can play other impactful threats. This another way to think about this, or another way that I like to think about this in the context of Lorwyn, would be you are trying to deplete your opponent's removal or tax your opponent's removal by forcing them to care about more of the creatures that you play. And I think we just came off a format where it really mattered to have a good curve. Like that was kind of the most important thing in Avatar, was being able to play a bunch of cheap cards, and you were just going to be able to get the game over with that. That doesn't feel like it cuts it in this format. It really feels like you need to be playing more impactful things than 2-drops. Now, obviously you want to play a bunch of 2-drops because you still want a good curve, but you want to make sure that a higher percentage of your deck is filled with impactful cards in order to really tax your opponent's interaction so they aren't able to just interact with efficiently your first threat that they need to deal with. You want them to not be able to deal with your 4th and 5th, for instance. Card advantage is definitely one way to do that in this format. You can just draw more cards than your opponent. But I also think it's worth considering certain cards more up the curve that have an outsized impact on the game. Examples of this include the namesake of the episode, Brambleback Brute. I kind of feel like I failed as a content creator with this card because I don't have enough time to make a Lucky Paper radio style cold open with me singing the Chili's Baby Back Ribs song, because I've been calling this Baby Back Brute. But this card is a 3-mana 4/5 at common in red. Enters with 2 -1/-1 counters on it, and you can pay 2 mana at sorcery speed to remove a counter from it, and target creature can't block this turn. This is just a 3-mana 2/3 on curve, which is like not good, but it's also not bad. If this was any smaller, or like a 3/2, I would like it a lot less. But it enters as a 2/3, and it kind of has like an adapt ability. Like it has this mana sink to turn it into a more impactful creature. Like we're used to paying 5 mana for our 4/5s rather than 3 mana. But this is 3 mana with 4 additional mana in installments, but the installments matter. This gives you a way to spend mana as the game goes on. And this is a cheap card that has an impact later in the game. Like you can turn this into a 4/5 later in the game. And this is the type of impact that I'm looking for out of my cards. They're cards that are good on curve and also have something that you get later on in the game when the board starts to stall out and the game starts to stall out. The cannot block mode on this card has come up for me a lot. But I think a big part of this card is that it's a cheap-ish card. It's a 3-mana 2/3 that has the ability to grow into a 4/5. Honestly, I've been pretty impressed with basically all of the creatures that enter with -1/-1 counters and have an ability to grow. That's basically the tree folk and the giants. So they're mostly uncommons. Brambleback Brute's basically the only common. You have Burdened Stoneback, which is the basically 2-mana 2/2 and white at uncommon. You can remove a counter to give something indestructible. You have Moonlit Lamenter, which is the tree folk that can draw cards. You have Hovel Hurler, which is the Boros hybrid that turns into a 6/7 eventually. It's a 5-drop 4/5 that turns into a 6/7, and it can give things flying, which is very impactful. Reaping Willow is the black-white hybrid card, the Tree Folk with lifelink that can reanimate small things. These have all been impactful on-curve plays, or like they've been on-curve plays that aren't embarrassing and then have the ability to grow as the game progresses. And I've been really happy and kind of scared of these across the battlefield, just based on the way that my games have played out. Gristle Glutton is a card that works really well alongside these. Gristle Glutton is a common in red. It is a 2-mana 1/3, and you can tap it, blight 1, discard a card if you do draw a card. This card looked awful to me in spoiler season. I'm used to Actium Engraver, which was a different card in Phyrexia that was amazing. It was a very similar common, but didn't have a blight downside to loot. It just basically had like 2 charges. Like I said, card advantage really matters in this format. So getting some card selection out of your 2-drop is really impactful there. And this also just works so well with these giants and tree folk that come with the counters and have the ability to have them removed. Just setting up an engine. I had a game where I turned my Brambleback Brute into a 0/1 and then was able to spend basically 8 mana to make 4 things not be able to block and swing with my 4/5. Has been a really good combo at common. I've really been liking red in general. Like I mentioned, I really like Burning Curiosity. I'm going to talk about I'm going to gush a little bit about Cinder Strike later on. But I've really liked this sort of cycle of cards that have the ability to grow as these impactful plays that you play up the curve and then have the ability to do some stuff with the mana later. I'm going to mostly just be spending the rest of the episode talking about other cards in this vein. These cards that have impact on the game that sort of forces your opponent into a spot where they kind of need to answer it, or they will die or just get buried in card advantage. The Merfolk have been pretty good at this, in my opinion. The card Gravelgill Scoundrel is a common. It's a 2-drop in blue. It's a 1/3 vigilance. Whenever this creature attacks, you may tap another untapped creature you control. If you do, this creature can't be blocked this turn. Obviously, like a 1/3 vigilance unblockable is not going to have a huge impact on the game. Like it only pecks for 1 every turn. But Merfolk have so many cards that have these tap abilities, like whenever this creature becomes tapped, do something. So for example, Pestered Wellguard is a 4-mana 3/2. Whenever this creature becomes tapped, create a 1/1 blue and black fairy creature token with flying. Getting a token on this card is amazing, but usually if you're not doing anything tricky with it, you have to send it in, and it's just going to die in combat. But Gravelgill Scoundrel enables this on curve. So you can go on turn 4, you play your Wellguard, you attack with your Scoundrel, you tap your Wellguard, immediately get the token. That turns the Wellguard into a card I'm very, very happy to play, especially because you're threatening to get a token the next turn with the same combo. And that can really compound. And this means that your opponent not only needs to care about the Pestered Wellguard itself, they also kind of need to care about the Gravelgill Scoundrel on curve, because Merfolk has so many of these cards that tap for a benefit. Just at common, you also have Tributary Vaulter, which is a white card. It's a 3-mana 1/3 flying. Whenever it becomes tapped, another target Merfolk you control gets +2/+0 until end of turn. This is a total wombo combo with Gravelgill Scoundrel. Turning Scoundrel basically into Otter Penguin into a 2-mana 3/3 vigilance really makes this an impactful play. And I think that Gravelgill Scoundrel is sort of the centerpiece of the Merfolk deck at common. And I think that it enabling all of your Merfolk stuff on curve turns this into an individually impactful play that your opponent has to deal with, that can make room for other like creatures like flyers. Like Merfolk can make a lot of flying creatures with like the blue-white Convoke card and stuff like that. I've been playing a lot of red, and I have been very impressed with Kolrath Zealot. This is the red land cycler. It has basic land cycling for 1 in a red, but normally it costs 5 in a red for a 6/5. When it enters, exile the top card of your library, and until the end of your next turn, you may play that card. It's a 2-for-1, and also kind of importantly, it's enormous. Like a 6/5 is going to be the biggest thing on the battlefield on most boards. It dodges some of the removal And this card's just been really impactful. I'm very happy to stack my deck with them. If I have 3, I would consider trimming a land in my deck sometimes, but you really do want to cast this on 6 and keep being able to spend mana. So this has been really good in my elementals decks, which is a space I've been pretty happy to play alongside stuff like Gristle Glutton and Burning Curiosity. I know that Elves is performing really well, and I've seen some very, very scary elf decks. I want to talk about 2 commons that I have noticed being very scary across the battlefield, or one that's really scary and one that is also sneaky good, I think. One is Safe Right Cavalry. This is a common. It's a 4-mana 4/4. Can't be blocked by more than one creature. And you can pay 5 to have target elf you control get +2/+2 until end of turn. You can do that at instant speed. This is just like textbook. You have to care about this. I honestly maybe should have titled the episode Safe Right Cavalry instead of Brambleback Brute. But this card is just so impactful on its own. It can't be blocked by more than one creature. Creatures I've found are generally kind of small in this format, so it's very hard to get a creature that interacts favorably with this in combat. And even further, when your opponent gets to 5 mana, you can't even block this with a 4/4 because they can just turn this into a 6/6. So this is basically unblockable, or they can chump block with it, but it's really hard to interact with this in combat, which makes it a very individually impactful card and actually worth the 4 mana without an End Her's ability or a protection ability. Another elf that has been performing really well, I know, is Dawnhand Eulogist, which is a 4-mana 3/3 with Menace. When it enters, you mill 3 cards. Then if there is an elf card in your graveyard, you drain 2. This card has less battlefield presence, but chipping away at your opponent's life total is important. And also a menace creature does kind of threaten to do something on its own. Needing to put 2 blockers in front of a menace creature means that your opponent is setting themselves up to get 2 for 1 if you have a removal spell in hand or a trick of some kind. And menace as a keyword on a reasonable body like a 3/3 does turn this into a card that your opponent does have to care about at some point. Moving on to some uncommons. Thoughtweft Imbuer. This is a 4-mana 0/5 Kithkin. Whenever a creature you control attacks alone, it gets +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the number of Kithkin you control. This is very good in the Kithkin deck. Obviously, because it cares about Kithkin, turning all of your little creatures into big threats one at a time. This is a card that your opponent will definitely have to deal with. Otherwise, you'll just get to keep attacking them with 1 creature a turn until they're out of chump blockers, basically. In a similar vein, I kind of forgot to mention, equipment can be a way to make your opponent care about individual threats. I don't think that the dagger is good, the dagger being the one that makes a changeling. But I have found that in Merfolk, where you have a lot of individually evasive threats, so Tributary Vaulter and Gravelgill Scoundrel, like I mentioned earlier, that has flying and unblockable, the dagger does add up, and equipment in general have the ability to turn each of your creatures into an individually powerful threat. So that's something to consider if you have a lot of evasion. And I think that Thoughtweft Imbuer, just giving a large stat boost to a creature every turn, has a similar impact as equipment. Omni Changeling. This is a 5-mana 0/0. It's 3 blue, but it has Convoke and Changeling, and it's a clone. You can have it enter as a copy of any creature on the battlefield except it has Changeling. This basically copies your impactful card, your singularly impactful card, or can copy your opponent's as well. I think this card's very, very good in Merfolk when you're making a lot of tokens. Obviously, the Convoke has a lot of applications there. But this is a card that I've seen overperforming in general in a lot of people's opinions, and I would keep an eye out for this one as well. Just a couple more. Gut Spitter Gang. This is a 4-mana 6/6 in black at uncommon. It's a goblin. At the beginning of your first main phase, you may blight 2. If you don't, you lose 3 life. Don't think this card's going to be like generically good, but I have been impressed with it as a singularly large threat in my black decks. There is a red card at uncommon that can give haste. That makes this really scary. And the turn cycle it comes down, like basically as a blocker, it's always a 6/6. You don't have to blight or lose the life until your turn. And I've been pretty impressed with that. And a 6/6 also is just like huge in this format. I found that creatures are generally pretty small. And speaking of huge, Moon Vigil Adherence. 2 green for a 0/0 trample elf. And it gets +1/+1 for each creature you control and each creature card in your graveyard. So this does not just count elves, it counts literally every creature you control or in your graveyard. I've seen this be like a 12/12 in the elf deck when you have a lot of self-mill. This is a large creature with no enters ability and no protection, though it kind of does have protection because it dodges every red removal spell unless you can nab it early. So this is absolutely a card you should be paying attention to, and I think is definitely an overperformer in both elves and Kithkin. Just to wrap it up with the impactful individual cards, a class of card that are definitely fit into this are the Lords. So Deep Channel Duelist is the blue-white merfolk. It's a 2/2 for 2, and you can untap a merfolk at your end step, and it just gives all of your merfolk +1/+1. This also really helps tax your opponent's removal. If you can line up multiple of these in a row, your opponent has to start respecting them and removing them because they're just going to make your things huge and you're going to have good attacks and be able to pressure them. I think that these definitely fall into the camp. There's like basically all of them except the blue-red one have like this ability to pressure the opponent with your onboard advantage. And I think these really fall into that camp as well. As far as interacting, like I said, I'm not going to waste your time just saying removal is good. But I do want to talk about a couple interaction spells in particular. One is Cinder Strike. This is single red sorcery. As an additional cost to cast a spell, you may blight 1. It deals 2 damage to target creature and 4 if you blighted. This card's been absolutely incredible. It's just felt so amazing when your opponent plays the Safe Right Cavalry, the 4 mana 4/4, and you get to nab it for 4 mana. It feels amazing. I think Cinder Strike is the best common in the format. I don't know what the data is going to say. I am sticking to this, and I've talked to so many people that have also been saying, yeah, Cinder Strike has just felt like closer to Flame Slash than not, which is really an incredible rate. And I'm picking Cinder Strike over most of the uncommons at this point. In these long stally games where you're just kind of waiting with your opponent, you're maybe on a top deck war and you're waiting to see who draws their impactful spell. If your deck is set up to get into that type of game state, notably, that's elementals for me. I have really liked Wild Unraveling. This is blue instant at common. As a digital cost to cast a spell, blight 2 or pay 1, and it counters target spell. I don't think this is going to be generically good. Like, I don't think this is a good merfolk card, but my elementals deck makes a lot of mana. It sees a lot of cards, and it has had a lot of ability to sort of control the board and hold up mana for this and really be picky about where I spend it. And I found that this has bailed me out in a lot of scenarios where I've been in a really tense situation and I've been able to counter my opponent's bomb spell and play my own. This has been a pretty valuable spell, in my opinion, in those types of decks. The last card I want to talk about is Anti-Sentence. This is a 2-mana sorcery, choose 1. Target opponent reveals their hand, you pick a non-land permanent card and they discard it, or -2/-2 to a creature. I haven't played this, but I do have my eye on it as a card that can pick impactful plays out of my opponent's hands. I do worry that this card is such a bad top deck that it doesn't really deal with things that are on board already that well. Like -2 is not going to kill very many things unless you're picking off a creature lord or something like that. But I do have my eye on this or something. Maybe if I'm playing like best of 3, this is really good out of the sideboard to answer specific stuff. But I do have my eye on this as a black spell that I could see myself underrating right now. And that's going to wrap it up. I hope you're enjoying Lorwyn Eclipsed as much as I am. I think this format is really cool. There's a lot of interesting draft navigation that I've found very challenging and rewarding so far. So I'm very excited to dig in a little deeper as the weeks go on. If you want to reach out to me, you can find me on Blue Sky at sampratt.bsky.social. You can find me on Discord at samp6, and I stream at samp_MTG on Twitch. Thanks for listening. See you next week.